when you're ready to kind of get close to a close, just let me know. Maybe I should get my my watch. Oh, I have it on. When you think of
I'll give you a 2-minute warning when we get close to. We'll
yeah.
break at 2:29. We'll go into commercial. Do that for a minute, and then we'll come back out, and you can move to a second topic
I
or
was going to
something.
say, are you joining us from Denver? Because it's 12:29 in Denver.
Too many shows. I got too many shows. I forget which are which.
Welcome to M Squared Techcast, a live internet radio show offering the latest news and interviews with the people driving business, technology, and politics in Michigan. Now, your hosts, Matt Roush and Mike Brennan.
Hey, it's Matt Roush.
And Mike Brennan.
And we're back with a special pre-Thanksgiving edition of the M Squared Techcast. We have with us our favorite epidemiologist and infectious disease expert, Fred Brown, who has been working in the industry for nigh on to 40 years now in terms of the public health industry and the pharmaceutical industry. And we have him for the entire hour today, and we're very lucky to have that much of his time. So welcome to the show, Fred.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me, you guys. Gosh, it's great to be back, and such great news today with AstraZeneca coming out with also apparently an effective vaccine. Of course, this is all early days, but exciting. I did want to just say that I am sorry I feel kind of personally responsible for destroying everyone's Thanksgiving this year, but but I think by next time this year it'll be better.
But we're not giving out your address, so they can't pick at your house.
Well, there are a couple things that I think if you are not going to travel this year, I think that'll be helpful and sad. One thing you might want to do is take that money that you would have paid for, to buy a plane ticket, and maybe buy some, good lighting and some equipment for the family to get together remotely, and just spend a more intimate time together remotely. I know it doesn't make up for it, but it's really about tradition, and maybe this can at least make up for some of the traditions that people are going to miss this year if they're trying to stay protective and stay home rather than to visit everybody in the family like we usually do. This year we usually have about 40 people come for Thanksgiving. This year it's just Betsy, me, and the dog. So that's it.
Yeah, well, like we said, the dog's real happy about that, right?
Yeah, so we got 16 pounds of turkey and nowhere we're not going to be able to eat that much.
I think the dog will help you with that.
That's right. Oh yeah, I'm sure she will.
So one of the things that we didn't get to last week, you were talking about vaccines, and of course, as you said, AstraZeneca this morning announced that theirs was 70% effective, but it doesn't have to be frozen at minus 100 below zero, kind of not that much. But the Pfizer one, it's not real transportable. Or it is, but I mean, you'd have to get one of those industrial strength freezers to keep it, right?
That's exactly, you're right. My labs would tend to have a minus 70 freezer, have minus 70, minus 90 freezers in them. The labs that I work with, but most people don't. That is really hard to keep that cold.
So one of the things you didn't get to last week that you wanted to was the safety aspect. So I believe that's what you wanted to discuss.
Yeah,
right?
you're right. Now that AstraZeneca's come out, this really is a game changer for several reasons. The first one that you mentioned is that you can ship it at what they call biological temperatures. That's 2 degrees to 8 degrees centigrade. So that's what you typically have as a refrigerator, and almost every pharmacy has a refrigeration capability. Not every of them has a dry ice. Not every of them has a minus 70, but every one of them has to have at least a refrigeration facility, and that means that and we know how to transport minus either 2 to 8 degrees centigrade to about 5 billion people. When you talk about minus 20, which Moderna requires, then you're only talking about about 2.5 to 3 billion people. But this is a big one. That's one big issue, the logistics. The second big issue with AstraZeneca is that it validates that a second platform technology, and I'll just show you this quickly. We had several different kinds of platform technologies that we were working on. And if I'll just show you this quick. We've seen the screen. I just wanted to reemphasize that there are basically There are basically 5 types of ways of going after a virus. 3 of them are genetic vaccines. These all require platforms. These companies have these platforms, and then they put the antigen into them or on them. So the DNA, RNA, they actually put the DNA and RNA that they're interested in replicating that little piece of the virus, not the whole virus, a little piece of it, into the platform, and then they bring the platform forward. In the case of RNA and DNA, it's a lipid platform. It's really gooey and slippery, and so basically it slips into the cell naturally. The vector protein is actually an active transport mechanism. They actually take out the virus that's in there, put in the antigen, the piece of DNA that codes for the antigen that they're interested in expressing in the cell, and then that antigen actually, that DNA actually gets injected into the cell just like you would a normal virus. And then you have the spike protein, the subunit proteins, and those are lots of different proteins that are all on a platform and also cause an antigenic response. What's interesting about the DNA RNA is that is one kind of technology platform. That's the lipid platform that they're talking about, and that is both Moderna and Pfizer. So until AstraZeneca came through and said, hey, our viral vector platform is working, we didn't know if the viral vector platform was going to be effective against COVID. And the thing about the viral vectors is we have a lot more experience with viral vectors than we do with DNA RNA. DNA RNA, we have no experience. This is the first real big one that we're able to come out with. The viral vector, though, those are major vaccine types that are already in place. And so that brings me to the third big issue with AstraZeneca. When we talk about Moderna, we talk about Pfizer, because these are brand new platform technologies. We didn't have any capacity. They thought they could get to 100. They thought they could get to 1 billion doses each by the end of 2021. So they're scaling up to 1 billion doses each Pfizer and Moderna, which gives you 2 billion doses. Well, AstraZeneca has 6 billion doses ready to go now.
Wow.
So that's a completely different, and they're already manufacturing these doses in 10 countries. So you're talking about a whole nother level of capability, right? So with that, we started out yesterday, the last time we spoke last week about with this piece, which basically says we got 4 ways of looking at a vaccine that you should take to heart personally, because you're going to have to make a decision with your doctor about which vaccine you want. And we went through efficacy and the effectiveness, and we talked about the fact that we'd chosen clinical endpoints that were pretty easy to hit, because we didn't want to take the time and expense if the vaccine was going to fail anyway, to try to get to a great efficacy endpoint, which is we reduce transmission. And we talked about the fact that we aren't going to have any data for this. We'll have to actually go back around and look at what the real world data is telling us to extrapolate into the transmission field. We won't detect this directly, but what we will do is we'll see naturally as we have the vaccination. Some nursing homes will get injections, others won't, and we can look at the level of transmission, around commonality, in common settings with common patients, and we'll get a sense of that. And that'll take us about 6 months. So we don't know what the effective transmission rate is, but I wanted to go back and just say quickly what I did was, I said, as soon as Moderna, since we talked, Moderna came out, as you know, with an effective vaccine, and Pfizer re-upped its vaccine from 90% effectiveness to 94.5%, 95% effectiveness. Moderna's at 94.5%, and we're talking about almost perfect vaccines to date, with almost no safety issues. That are certainly none that are significant, and no safety issues, period, on that are worrisome. What I did here was I said, suppose we only had Pfizer. That was my original case, and you can see that we don't hit kind of the opportunity to get to herd immunity with a 90% reduction in reproductive rates until early in 2022. If we suddenly add the 100 million to billion doses on average next year, we'll have an extra 500 million doses from Moderna, in addition to on average 500 million doses of Pfizer. Now they'll ramp up, right? So you won't get all those doses until about August to September. and we won't get to a billion until the end of the year. But you can see how much faster we're starting to hit, a effective herd immunity. We're talking about, getting it 3 to 4 months earlier. And now if we add AstraZeneca's effectiveness back into the equation, I haven't run all the numbers yet, but my guess is that we're talking about theoretically being able to, hit a point of moving to a free market environment with little supply constraints by the middle of next year, and possibly getting to herd immunity by late summer, or at least having access to sufficient patients to inject by late summer to achieve herd immunity. Now we won't be able to run all the tests by that point. We've got to do trials to check out whether or not we can inject the infants and toddlers. Right now, the youngest people that have been injected are 12 years old, and that's not sufficient to really get children fully vaccinated. But we'll do those. They're called cross trials. We'll do the cross analyses to see pretty quickly to see whether or not we can use these vaccines effectively in children. Generally, the vaccine response in children is better than in elderly, and we're having a great response in elderly, as you saw with the Pfizer results, saying 94.5% impact on elderly in terms of reduction in symptoms, which is a tremendous result. Those are the kind of populations we really worry about a lot, and those are the most susceptible to dying. So it'll really make a huge impact. I think by the middle of next year. Originally, when Pfizer came out, I thought by the end of next year, but now with AstraZeneca in place, we're talking about the middle of next year. But one of the things that is interesting is that they claimed that they were, and they are, actually testing 2 different vaccine types. One is a vaccine which puts 2 doses, 2 normal-sized doses in succession, 28 days apart. The other one, the other protocol they were using, puts half a dose to kind of prime your immune system in on your first dose, and then it puts a full dose into the second round, and that actually is showing higher efficacy. And there are dosing effects that this has precedent. That's why they tried 2 different doses, because they thought this might be the case for their vaccine. So I think we may be able to enjoy a third vaccine with over 90% efficacy. My models originally projected that we were going to be at about 77% efficacy for is what I was projecting for the J&J vaccine. We'll have to see, based on very, very early results that I had some access to. And we'll have to see if it actually improves now that J&J is coming through. J&J is important because they have a single dose. So if we have half a dose plus 1 dose, suddenly we increase, our available supply by another, 30%, 33%. So that's exciting.
Let me ask you a couple questions, if
Sure,
I may.
absolutely.
It seems like there's still like 175 other candidates out there around the world in development. I know we haven't heard much about those, but just looking at the ones that we do know about, for instance, if I wanted to try, I'm just, question here. If I wanted to try the Pfizer vaccine and then maybe I wanted to try the Moderna vaccine, are there going to be issues with the, vaccines fighting against each other kind of thing, or what?
Well, they code for the same, fundamentally they code for the same thing. So we don't believe there will be issues, but we haven't done the trials yet. So I wouldn't mix and match at this point. Certainly not between platforms, and not even within a platform. So in other words, Pfizer, Moderna, I wouldn't do that, and certainly I wouldn't mix J&J with Moderna, for example.
So pretty much you're locked into whatever you're going to give a shot at, right? Then
well, you're locked. It's sort of interesting, right? If what's happening, if the reason that you want the second vaccine is because you're not happy with the efficacy of the first round, suppose you take a serology test, you said, gosh, the antibodies aren't protective, then it's okay to take another vaccine because you already know the antibody levels you've got aren't protective. Like you're not going to have a response. So if the reason that you're doing it is because, gosh, this isn't very protective, and I've had then there are antibody tests. They're called serology tests that are from Enable Biosciences. You can get the test done. It costs about $140, and you can see whether or not what the quality and quantity of the neutralizing antibodies are. And if you get that test and then they say, your doctor says, I'm really unhappy with the level of neutralizing antibody in your system, then you can go ahead, and do anything you like, because by definition, you're not going to have a response that's sufficient. But certainly talk to your doctor about that, get the test, and then see whether your antibodies are low enough to then, that they aren't protective. If they aren't protective, then you want to either get a booster or get a different vaccine.
And the other issue that has come up, I know, in conversations and from what I've read, is even when people get COVID and they get the antibodies, they don't last very long, like 3, 4, 5 months, somewhere in that ballpark,
Yeah, that's actually the bigger problem. And we'll get into that. Why don't I talk a little bit about safety? You brought that up, and I think it's a great thing to go into. And then we'll talk about the other two areas, which is scale, which I've hinted at, and durability, which is really going to be our biggest, one of our two big challenges left. In terms of herd immunity. Safety, on the safety side, what's interesting about safety is there. Let me go to the slideshow. There we are. What's interesting about safety is that basically we're concerned about two things. The first is the frequency of the first of all, we're only concerned about adverse events. And I apologize for these slides. The text has come a little bit out of alignment, but you can see that basically serious adverse events are what you really are interested in. Minor adverse events like inflammation at the injection site, or a little bit of fatigue, or a headache, or a slight chill, or a slight fever. Those are what we call class 1, class 2. They can get up to class 3 adverse events, but they don't require a doctor's intervention or a hospital intervention or result in a death. If something results in a death or a serious side effect, then we typically stop the trial, especially when we've only injected a certain number of people. Because if we have to inject 1 billion people or 7 or 8 billion people with a virus where it's already showing issues after injecting only 10,000, you got a problem. And so for that reason, you can we're pretty confident about the safety. We've got a much larger clinical trial size than we normally do in a phase 3 trial for a vaccine. So we're not expecting a lot of very rare adverse events at this point in the general population. We are concerned about them in specific populations that may not be sufficiently tested. So as we roll out, we'll be watching for very rare adverse events. Right now, we're probably at the detection level of 1 in 50,000, kind of rate of having an adverse event. And if it's serious, even higher detection level. The other big thing we're worried about is whether that when that event occurs. Does it come early, within kind of 3 months to 6 months, or does it occur long term? When you've got additional infection, additional issues, when you've taken other medicines over time, you can sometimes find you have an adverse event. And so right now, our biggest danger of having safety issues is probably in those adverse events that occur 50,000 in 1 in 50,000 times or less, or in special populations, and occur after the 2 to 3 month interval that we're concerned about. And interestingly, the FDA came out just before the election and said we'd like to have 2 months of safety data. And people were saying, gosh, that seems a little bit political because that puts us just over the election period. Actually, it had nothing to do with the politics. We actually see most of the adverse events occur after 42 days. We like a 6, and at that point, you see between 90 and 95% of all adverse events in all vaccines if you look at the clinical studies. And so if you only wait a month, it would have been way too early, and we could have really, subjected ourselves to a series of pretty bad adverse events unknowingly if we'd already put it into an EUA situation, vaccinating, elderly people and our frontline healthcare workers with something that could have safety issues. So that's the reason we did that, and I think it was the right thing to do. Right now we're at a detection limit. I think that is indicating these vaccines are extremely safe, especially if you think about their mode of action, how they really work. So you can see that there are some really critical unknowns still about the serious adverse event, and you really want to watch the serious adverse events. You want to look at whether or not there's population impact. So if you're in a particular population, if you've got a certain ethnicity, look to make sure the vaccine you're taking has been tested a lot in your specific ethnicity. Certainly several thousand. The risk of antibody-dependent enhancement. This is when the vaccine actually starts to select towards something that's, the vaccine puts selective pressure on the virus and actually causes it to become more powerful, more potent. The risk of late onset serious adverse events that we haven't detected yet, because we haven't tested this for more than 2 months and watched people with more than 2 months at a large scale, that can happen. And you can see that you may have some contraindications based on your health status and your medications you've taken. So with that, there are 2 kinds of adverse event that I actually modeled. The first adverse event is one where it's generally dispersed, where there isn't a particular population focus. And in that case, that's on the left-hand side. You can see that basically I modeled one which had a better safety profile, which is 1% adverse event rate, versus a worse safety profile of 10% adverse event rate. And here you can see basically the separation between the purple and the blue line, the worse and the better safety profile, is just insignificant. And the reason for that is the populations very quickly after the first couple of months realize that they're allergic to something. They can actually there's actually biomarkers that indicate allergies, and you can very quickly separate the populations who are going to have an adverse event from the rest, and so your overall impact, you can see it's worth for everyone to take this test if you're not allergic. The other kind of adverse event is one that actually is one that overly affects a particular population, and if it overly affects a population that is most prone to have a bad COVID outcome, like the elderly who have morbid diseases. So suppose it was all elderly with cardiovascular and or diabetes, that would put you up, at a pretty significant percent of the population who are most vulnerable. If you can't inject these people, then you can see there's a big separation between between a drug vaccine that has a good safety profile of less than 1%, happening in 1% or less, versus a vaccine that has a 10% 10% adverse event rate in the high mortality populations. So I hope that's clear. The kind of adverse event really is going to make a difference, and you should monitor that, because you don't want to have a bad outcome from taking something that's basically good if you're in that special population. So we'll be able to monitor that. We'll see those results. They should come out. What's interesting is the FDA decided to go ahead and publish the results, so we will see that. I'm a little bit disappointed in that. They went to rolling evaluations, and that means that we won't have quite as much statistical power in the overall analysis, but we will be able to tell very specifically what's happening earlier in certain populations. We just won't be able to do it as broadly as we could if they hadn't opened the entire trial. But the FDA did what they did, I think, because they were concerned about the speed at which we're going, and I think that I'm sure they knew they had their reasons for allowing the whole trial to be open now. So that's it.
Would the results vary by sex? With male or female, does it make any difference?
It can. It absolutely can. So you want to look at inclusion and exclusion criteria. In this particular case, they excluded females who could or are pregnant in many cases. In some trials, they did allow for pregnant women to be injected. So watch for those. And again, we showed no harmful effect on the fetus or on the woman. But in some instances, we haven't tested that population very much in a number of these vaccines. So inclusion and exclusion criteria do really matter. We've tried to to kind of overpopulate this with with older and with people of color. So we have generally about a 30 to 40% rate of those people being tested, and we did that because those groups, those populations are being targeted right at the beginning of rollout of the vaccine, because they're more vulnerable. They tend to have a greater concentration of essential workers in them, and they're of course have a much worse outcome right now. We really want to vaccinate people who are most at risk of dying, and sadly the Black population has about a 4 times, age control has about a 4 times higher death rate than the white population. So that's what we're trying to give that population access to the vaccine as soon as possible. So we want to test more earlier. That's a great question. And so look at the inclusion exclusion criteria and look at the adverse event seriousness. If it moves to a level 4, level 5, you really want, and it looks like it's in a population that's similar to yours, I would probably, now that we have it out of choice of 3 different vaccines, apparently by the middle of the next year, I would choose to stay away. Talk to your doctor, but I'd choose to stay away from that kind of a vaccine. Now, this is the durability question you asked about, and this is the last kind of quadrant that we look at, and we can't tell. We just don't know whether we're going to have a vaccine that lasts forever, like the measles on the far right-hand side of the chart, or whether we're going to have something that's much more like SARS or the flu, where you need to have a booster literally, every 150 days or every 200, and in the case of SARS, every couple of years. In the case of MERS, every 4 years. We think that it's likely on the first generation of vaccines, unless we're super lucky, we should probably anticipate needing booster shots every year. And so we'll have to get used to that and be ready with an infrastructure that's able to do this again and again every year. That's 480, possibly up to 200 to 500 million doses every year. And I was
going to say, and once again, let me put in my plug for the Red Cross.
Yes.
If you donate blood, you get a free antibody test, so you can check and see if you still have antibodies just by giving blood. So,
we got about 1 minute, Fred, before we have to take a short break. So
yeah, absolutely. So as you said, we'll have to do serology testing, and serology testing actually looks at the level of antibody in your blood, and so basically you can tell very quickly whether you're exposed and your vaccine is waned and you need to have another vaccine, or whether you're ready to go and to continue without any booster shots. So we have this neutralizing antibody testing testing capability, and my guess is that probably there'll be a large part of the population that actually is asked to continually send in dried blood sample to these labs. You just prick your finger, put it on a piece of paper, send it in, and probably every 2, 3, 4 months on a regular basis, so that we can tell whether or not the vaccine that you're on is waning for your population, for your genome, and for your health status. So with that, why don't we take a quick break and we'll talk about scalability next.
All right, we'll be back after this commercial break. We have to thank our sponsor, Lawrence Technological University. And so we'll do that, and then we'll resume in about a minute or so.
Lawrence Technological University graduates earn a degree and a higher starting salary. In fact, when it comes to earning potential, the Brookings Institution ranks LTU 5th among U.S. colleges and universities.
Is it going okay?
More at LTU.
Yeah.
Possible.
Oh, you're asking great questions.
Salaries of Lawrence Tech grads are among the highest of any university in America. Plan a campus visit to meet with counselors, faculty, and coaches. Why wait? Find out more at ltu.edu.
What do you get at Lawrence Technological University? Everything. Great labs and studios, supportive professors, plus a full campus life, NAIA athletics, and all the software you need to succeed. Be smart. Be more. At LTU, possible is everything.
Salaries of Lawrence Tech grads are among the highest of any university in America. Plan a campus visit to meet with counselors, faculty, and coaches. Why wait? Find out more at ltu.edu.
Hey, it's Matt Roush.
And Mike Brennan.
And we're back with another segment of Fred Brown on the M Squared Techcast on mitechnews.tv. Fred, you're going to talk to us a little bit more about the vaccines that we've been hearing about. All right, we talked about how they work and durability and that kind of thing, but now you're talking about scalability.
Yeah, it turns out, so we think these vaccines are going to work. We think they're going to be safe. We hope they're going to be durable. We're not sure yet. But the biggest question that remains is, there are two big questions that remain. The first is, can we get them to everybody? And the second is, will people take them? So let's talk a little bit about those two things.
Okay.
Other than that, everything's perfect.
Yeah, we seem to have a lot of people in this country that somehow, for some reason, think vaccines are bad. I don't know where that came from. I don't know the history of it, but it is a reality.
Yeah, it's disappointing because we work hard on these vaccines to make sure that they're safe for everybody, and there are going, with any medicine, there's going to be some sadly, a group of people who have some adverse events and who can't take a vaccine, or who have a bad reaction, but it's typically, we try to shoot for less than one in 10,000, one in 100,000, and hopefully none at all, for as far as a serious adverse event goes. But there are instances where the vaccine isn't as effective as the risk of taking it is. That's very rare, and the vaccine. It was funny. I got into, obviously I'm a drug discovery person, and in my career I've developed 27 major drugs. These are drugs like Remicade and Riopro, and drugs that everyone will have heard of if they're in the medical field, that save a lot of people every year, that I'm very proud of. A lot of oncology drugs as well. Also a number of diagnostics that help develop a lot of the diabetes diagnostics, the HIV diagnostics, some of these chronic disease diagnostics. They save a lot of people. But it wasn't until I really worked in vaccines where you can really point to millions and millions of people being saved. And those are the things I'm really most proud of. And I worked with actually with Dr. Slawi and a few others to develop. And they really do work, even though there are an awful lot that you've got to inject now. The good news is they save just so many lives, and the risks of an adverse event that are serious as getting the disease itself are usually about 1 in 1.4 to 1.5 billion. So it's got to be a pretty rare person that shouldn't take the vaccine. There may be 7 or 8 on the planet that shouldn't take most of the childhood vaccines, for example, because of the risk levels. And unfortunately, about 9% of the United States public is what we would call anti-vaccines, and they may have had a bad experience, or have a family member had a bad experience, and for that I'm sorry, but for the vast majority of us, that won't be the case. So this is about scalability, and the question is, can we make this stuff? And the answer, the reason that AstraZeneca, as I said, was a game changer is look where they are in terms of scalability, right? They are India has a capability of producing 8 billion vaccines a year. That's why they're up there. They are by far, they are our workhorse. AstraZeneca has, as a company, has the capability of doing 6 billion doses of this vaccine every year. So Novavax, with Takeda, 2 to 3 billion doses. Merck, 3 billion doses. China, about 1.2, 1.3 billion doses. J&J, Moderna, Pfizer all have about 1 billion dose capability. Sanofi also, and Russia has about a 300 million dose capability. That gives you a sense of just how many doses that we can get out. And it's a good thing we can get this many out, because we need to achieve herd immunity. We're going to have to probably inject close to 6 billion people. And we may have to do that every year. That's a lot of people, So you can see in this that basically J&J's vaccine, because it is only a single dose, you actually have to double their capacity. So they actually have versus Moderna and Pfizer, which have a double dose requirement, right? So they actually are slightly elevated in that, because they actually use their doses more efficiently. Pfizer actually only uses 3 micrograms versus per dose. Moderna uses 100. So that's why, you have to kind of look at the whole thing and quite carefully. My guess is that Pfizer, J&J Sanofi, Novavax, and certainly AstraZeneca will be a bigger player than Moderna in the short term. I think Moderna will skip.
So Fred, let me ask a Michigan-centric question.
Of course.
Where is Pfizer going to manufacture this stuff? Is it going to be at the plant in Kalamazoo County or someplace else?
Yes, that's where the finish is going to occur. So we've got a three-step, they're multi-step process. These are very complicated. These are very complicated, biologicals. And so we have a three-step project. They've got production facilities in Andover, Massachusetts, and St. Louis, Missouri, and then they push all that to a final what they call finish and fill and finish capacity, where they actually put it in the glass vials. They put the diluent in with the antigen. They put everything in, all the adjuvants and everything that comes together. So you have the antigen being produced, you've got the sauce being produced that it's in, and then you have to actually put it in the glass bottles. That all happens in Kalamazoo, and they've got a football field of freezers. In a warehouse at the size of
yeah, I was going to say about a million years ago, I was a reporter at the Kalamazoo Gazette and toured that plant a couple of times, and it is mammoth. It's just huge.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? When you start to see, people don't understand. You have to imagine a full football field of nothing but minus 70 freezers to understand. Yeah, and that's what's going out. Now they also have capability in Poos, Belgium. Belgium has another big manufacturer, and that's the BioNTech side of their equation, where they manufacture the antigen in Germany and they ship it up to Poos, where they actually fill and finish.
So let me, before we move forward, just on this, I know the big pharma industry doesn't exactly share, but if one of these drugs becomes really, really effective, would they share, and would they license it to other manufacturers? I mean, save the world, all that jazz, or that's not really going to be the driver here?
They don't usually share. They usually like to use their own technologies. Now, having said that, if you're a manufacturer, contract manufacturer, so if you are a discoverer of ethical drugs, you generally don't share a lot of this. Now, GSK was an exception in this case. They wanted to share their adjuvant technology. The adjuvant technologies are particularly important because what you do is you stimulate the immune response to a certain extent to say, the virus is here, I want to kill it, right? You don't want to go too far, otherwise you actually can cause an over-response to the immune system and cause harm. And you don't want to do it under, because if you do it under, then you're not going to have protection against the virus. So these adjuvants, these are the ones that kind of tune up the response just to the right level so that you don't get any bad side effects, but you have a sufficient response that you're protected from the virus. And GSK, to their credit, came out and said, we're going to provide adjuvants to anybody. We're not going to, because we want this thing to work. And so they're working most closely now with Sanofi, GSK Sanofi, but they're also willing to give their adjuvants beyond that partnership, which is a remarkable kind of concession, because those adjuvants are very valuable, take a long time to develop, are part of the secret sauce of the whole vaccine industry. So that was a very was remarkable. The other thing was that Takeda, who also has a huge capability as the largest Japanese pharmaceutical company, decided they were going to work instead on medicines instead of the vaccine, and they said they would provide capability, which means scale capability, to Novavax. So when Novavax started, they were a pretty small company, hadn't really produced any vaccines, and now Takeda is partnering with them in order to really get the vaccine out faster. And the Novavax vaccine is interesting because it has very high immunogenicity response, and it's also got a very slightly better safety profile, at least in preclinical studies, than some of the other drugs did, some of the other vaccines. So you'll be able to see that possibly being used in immunocompromised patients and very specialized patients, as well as the general population. And that'll come out probably in about May, June timeframe. It takes a bit longer for these viral particles to get going because they have to have many particles, whereas Moderna and J&J just had to have a single little piece of the DNA. That when you're talking about virus-like particles and subunit proteins, it's plural proteins. You've got to have a lot of different of them. You've got to produce them in quantity. So it takes the green technologies, that particle, the viral particle technology platforms are a little bit slower than the vector and the mRNA technologies. So that's a little bit about manufacturability. So the next big issue is actually, can we get this thing out? What's interesting is I put together, I'll show it to you at the end. We're going to have a bad winter, and so one of the things about the vaccine is you can't take your eye off the ball. And I did two quick scenarios. One that said, suppose you're in a state like Texas today. It said, we'll make the wearing of protective, of masks and hygiene and distancing voluntary. So right now Texas announced, the governor announced, 75% of capacity in restaurants, 50% capacity in bars. Wear your mask if you like. And we have actually experience with this, because it turns out Kansas did this back in June. The governor of Kansas got up and said, it's up to you guys. Counties, you choose. You can. There's an optional mask mandate. You can opt into it, and we'll help you enforce everyone wears a mask. And 30% of the counties in Kansas did this. And 70% of the counties in Kansas didn't do this. And what do you think happened?
Wasn't good in the 70s, right?
Yeah, the counties with the mask mandates did better. I mean, this is not rocket science here. Come on.
Yeah, it's not rocket science. And the risk is everyone's saying, oh my goodness, we got a vaccine coming. We can let our guard down. It'll be fine. It wouldn't have to make it through that period. I think that's what Texas did, right? We'll be popular. We'll say you don't have to do this. Everything will be great. And the population is really happy about that. They say, everything's cool. I'll just go out without my mask and so on. Well, the difference in performance tends to be that if you wear a mask, if you start off at 100 and you put in a mask mandate, you drop to 75, in terms of new cases. So it's supposed to start with new cases every day. Put in a mask mandate, minus 75. If you don't put in a mask mandate, that same population will grow to 150 cases, right? So you're talking about 100% swing, and in terms of 50% upwards or 50% downwards, we're wearing a mask and not wearing it. And in Kansas, those states since June, we've gone through a lot, right? This is since June, who did put in the mask mandate, their number of new cases and associated deaths went down by 6%. But if you were in one of the 70%, you tripled. That's how big this is. And so in terms of the number of cases, the number of deaths. And those are the same population, there's the same health system. Everyone's in Kansas. It's there's no really like, that I'm in a special county. You can't really claim that. So basically, if you run all the numbers, what happens if you don't control is we would go, just like we saw before, we go up to, and we will probably still go up to about 3,000 deaths per day max. I think that'll be our high. We might increase that slightly if we overwhelm the hospitals in a big metro area. Then we could go to, sadly, a 2, 3, 5. We could go as high as 5,000 a day if we overwhelm the hospitals, because that causes a double the death rate.
I watched an interview with Dr. Fauci over the weekend, and he used the analogy the cavalry is coming, but just because they're coming doesn't mean you should stop fighting, right? So.
That's right. And so here's basically here's the model. What the model says, and this has been a pretty accurate model to date. Basically, if you don't do anything, you're gonna it'll be like before. You'll plateau and you'll come down a little bit, and then you'll keep going up again and run the risk of exponential growth. And so what happens is, and if you do control, you'll come up to a peak, but then you'll start going down. You'll keep going down quite a bit, and you can see the difference is literally probably 2,000 or 3,000 people a day death rate by the time you get to next year. If you don't have a vaccine. The great news is we have a vaccine, or several vaccines now, but it really matters what starting point you are. If you're starting at 2,500 deaths a day, it's a big difference than if you're starting from only 1,500 deaths a day. That's because you've got a pandemic going on, and you got lots of people who, if they get together to get a vaccine and a shot, chances are going to get sick with what they're trying to get protected against. So it really makes a difference if we can can keep wearing the masks until we get to a point of herd immunity. And I think that time, now that we've got, this was done before the announcement from AstraZeneca, I think we could get there as early as middle of next year, where we can start to say, we can take the masks off. We can start to get to our herd immunity in certain populations where we're monitoring that. So you may not be able to do it everywhere because you'll still be a vector yourself. We're not sure about the duration. We're not sure about a number of things here. But generally, if those things all come to fruition, we could be talking about a point of getting to herd immunity by the end of the summer of this coming year.
Okay, so to put it in terms of the unofficial religion of this country, by next fall, it may not be completely insane to play football. So.
That's right. Well, I don't think you should be planning on practicing in June, July.
Okay. All right.
But you might be able to get ready for a late September, early October opportunity. And if you've got your vaccination cards, you can probably start.
You can buy a ticket. Yes,
start thinking about buying a ticket. Yes,
actually go.
The other question that comes up, Fred, is in what order will people get vaccinated? I know we discussed this before, and you were saying first responders and healthcare folks would be first.
Yeah.
Probably the nursing home people would be second, but then what?
Yeah. So here's the distribution. This is from the National Academy of Medicine. I contributed a little bit to some of the algorithms here today. ACIP, which is the body that is actually going to make the CDC rule, or the CDC will follow, is meeting today, and they're trying to figure out which sequence we should try to do at the national level. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through a two-step process. We'll start with each of the manufacturers saying, "Here's how much stuff I got." And they manufacture in batches. So Pfizer will say, I've got 100,000 batches. And the CDC will then say, okay, California gets 12,000 of those batches. Because we've looked at everyone's populations, we've looked at everybody's health status, we've looked at everybody's demography, and we've decided that, in order to be best for the health of the country, California, you get these. So then California is what they call a jurisdiction. We've got 64 jurisdictions. We've got 50 states plus DC. We've got 8 territories. We've got 6 big cities, and we've got the tribal nations, the Native American nations. So those are the jurisdictions, and so in this case, each of those jurisdictions takes their 12,000 in the case of California, and they say, okay, Joe, in San Francisco, you get this one. And Sam in San Diego, you're next on the list. And Sam says, I don't really want it. Okay, Ann, you're up next. And we'll go through that. And this is the way at the U.S. level we'll do this. Now, every state is different. I'm working with 17 states right now trying to figure out what the algorithm should look like. We've got a new system in place at the federal level called Tiberius, which is actually doing this automatically for the states if they want to. But a lot of states say, no, we want to do our own thing. Thank you very much. So there are a number, it's a little bit variable, especially at the state and jurisdictional level. But at the federal level, you can say with pretty good certainty that and this is going to accelerate now that we've got Moderna and possibly AstraZeneca involved. Originally with just Pfizer, we thought it would take us until the end of March to possibly inject 20 million people. Now that's going to probably be already by early February. Don't forget, you have to take the first vaccine, and then you got to take the second vaccine. So even though people say, oh, I got the vaccine, you still have to wait that 28, actually it's about 7 days after your second vaccination that you got are optimal for immunity levels. So,
well, Mike, it looks like you and I are both in phase 2, so hooray.
Hey, congratulations. So
one of the things of being old, we get to go second. So
yeah.
Now Dave is going to have to wait till phase 4, just because he's such a young whippersnapper.
And he's so healthy.
Wait for it, Dave. Yeah, but I think we're going to see that phase 4 be pushed up to August. Because we've got that much more vaccine available. Isn't that shocking? So yeah.
So these groups you have in phase 4 there, the angry disbelievers and such, If you add all those up, that looks like it's a significant chunk of the U.S. population, right?
That's the big problem, right? Even if we can get this out, and trust me, it is hard to get this stuff out. Now that we got AstraZeneca involved with a huge capacity, and we can, we don't have to worry about -20, -70 degree cold chains. A lot of the work I was doing on making sure that we can get this stuff out with Operation Warp Speed has gotten a lot easier, literally an order of magnitude easier. So which is great news. The problem is, I think we're going to get through the distribution challenge. One of the biggest issues is whether people will trust it. It's gone so fast because of this new technology that we have to kind of reorient our thinking. And so this is what it looks like. Here's our systems aren't very good, sadly. Here's what it looked like, right? The first generation vaccine is 90% effective. Let's say that's true. The population that's inoculated is likely to be about 50% on round one. I think we can increase that a little bit. But unfortunately, if you multiply 90% times 50%, we only have about 45% control. And we need to get to about 85% control to really get herd immunity. Now, a number of us have been infected, and so we'll have antibodies. Let's say that's another 10%. It may be a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, but don't forget they have to be neutralizing antibodies, and they have to be the right number of them. So it's not just getting, it may not be just being infected may not be enough to protect you in many cases. That means we still have about a 30% gap, right? The 45% plus a 10% versus what we really want to get to is 85. Now you can argue about this. Some people say, well, suppose we get our neutralizing antibody numbers in the general population up to 20%, and suppose for herd immunity, all we need to have is 75%. Then, but even if we do that, that's stretching it, and we still have a 10% gap from herd immunity, and that makes a big difference. And so we have these groups: anti-vaxxers, the angry disbelievers, the cultural resistors, and the skeptical laggards. And let's talk about those groups. And they have questions about the way we've managed this for good reason. The CDC, the FDA, the HHS have made some mistakes. It's gone so fast, we've made some mistakes, and there's no getting around it. And so we've lost some credibility here and there, and we have to rebuild it. So the question is, how do you go after it? And this is my thinking right now, having been in the segment for a while. I think they're going to be a group of people who say, gosh, this is going a little bit too fast for me. I want to see what happens to that first group. So they are what I call skeptical laggards. I believe, but let's see what happens to my Aunt Sue and a couple other people who I know, and I want to read some more results, and I want to make sure I got. I think we can over the course of 2021. I think we can move that group from 20% of the population to about 3% of the population, which would be great. And we do that with education and overcoming fear and saying, look, what you're losing if you don't do that. And I think if you get good public service announcements, good healthcare professional support, family and friends through a number of different media channels, I think we can get there with that group. Cultural resistors, these are people of color, ethnic groups who have looked at the past and said, wait a minute, in the past we've been the test dummies and test, the guinea pigs for these vaccines, and then it turns out that they don't work well, and our groups get disproportionately hurt by a failed vaccine, and there's historical precedent for this disbelief, and we've made some really mistakes in the past, and some of them. That this will never live down. Some of them were legitimate mistakes. Others of them were just being really stupid. But I think we can convince a number of the people, about half. I'm hoping about half, that hey, we've made some mistakes in the past. We've got a new social contract here. This is a vaccine that's going out to everybody, and it really is for you, and it's easy to do. And I think if we again move through celebrities, spiritual leaders, people who those communities trust, with the right set of media, we can convince half. I think, sadly, you mentioned the angry disbelievers and the anti-vaxxers. I think the anti-vaxxers, I've spoken with them a number of times about all the work I do in vaccines, and they have reasons for their disbelief in vaccines generally. Sometimes entire Western medicine entirely, generally, and I don't think we're going to be able to convince them. So we're gonna be missing 10% of the population no matter what we do. And then there's the angry disbelievers. These are the people who are basically upset about they think it's a political hoax. They think this whole thing's been overblown. They're angry about it.
That's the craziest thing that I read in the past week of these people that are yelling at the healthcare staff in the ICU that, until the moment they're intubated, they're still calling it a hoax. That was just nuts.
There was that sad story about that poor person who was intubated and thought he was absolutely convinced that COVID didn't exist and was sure it was lung cancer, and sadly that person died. Yeah, it's I don't think we're going to be able to convince more than 70. In other words, what this shows is I don't think we're going to be able to convince more than 70% of people to take this.
Well, the ones that aren't convinced will probably get COVID and they get the antibodies anyway, right? So
there is a relationship between people who don't wear masks, people who don't want to don't take vaccines, where they may likely get the disease and have some natural immunity. You're right. So maybe but when you get to 70% times 90%, and you're talking 90% effective for vaccine, talking about 63%. And for herd immunity in this particular case, we need at least 75%. So
we got about 2 minutes left, Fred.
So I think mandates will continue to be required to achieve herd immunity. That means your employer might require you, your school might require you, and so on. So with that, why don't we take a look at the roadmap? This is the roadmap I put together for the states. The first step is you reduce with NPI. So continue non-pharmaceutical intervention with masks. You prepare your vaccine infrastructure supply chain. And your goals are to get masks out to everybody who needs them, and to create a partnership network to deploy the vaccine. Next step is to localize. So you want to create your testing network so you can test the vaccine once it gets out there for durability, and test the level of antigen so you can localize those groups that are at risk. Then you want to vaccinate. I think that'll happen through June, and then you want to start monitoring the durability, the efficacy, and the safety, and you want to stratify by population and geography. And finally, you want to create and build a permanent pandemic infrastructure that allows you to fight the next pandemic, as well as be ready for the booster campaign should we need it with COVID. And with that, why don't we call it a day and say we've conquered the place? I think that'll happen by the end of the next year.
Well, we got 1 minute left, so talk about Thanksgiving's on Thursday. I've already told my family I'm not coming to Grand Rapids because my sister's having 12 people over. I won't say her address or anything, so the authorities come and get her. But I mean, essentially, that's not a good idea to do that right now, right?
No, I wouldn't recommend it. The travel is dangerous, and unless the 12 people are all within your family right now and they're living with you for more than 14 days.
No, my nephews are flying in from Minneapolis and other places, and so.
Yeah, no, not recommended. I mean, if you want to get ready for an event, you kind of have to wait. You have to kind of get ready for about 20 days in advance. What you do is you take a test, you get a negative test result, you go into quarantine, you quarantine for 14 days, you get on your plane. You test when you land, and then you test 4 days afterwards. If you're free if you get all negative tests, then you can go to that event and feel comfortable. That's the way we create bubbles today in various countries, and that's what you have to do.
All right, we're gonna have to leave it at that. So thanks very much, Fred. Always a pleasure. We'll get you back on the show next Monday. Hopefully, we'll have some new vaccines to talk about.
Oh my gosh, you guys are overwhelming me. I hope so. It's all good news, though. All good news, you guys.
All right, take us out, Matt.
All right. Well, we'll be back again next Monday at 2 p.m. Eastern time with another edition of the M Squared Techcast, mitechnews.tv. Right now, it's Matt Roush
and Mike Brennan.
And we'll see you again next week.
Oh, well, you saw some of the newest stuff, you guys. I'm just getting my